This is Colt Hamilton with Hamilton Native Outpost, and in today's video I want to talk to you about cool season forb diversity in a diverse native grassland and kind of how that functions. So to start with, there are forbs that are primarily warm season, meaning they go dormant in the fall and they don't green back up till spring. These sunflowers would be a good example. They're going to go dormant and they're not going to grow back until next spring. But there's a lot of forbs that overlap the winter season, and by that I mean they may stay green all winter long and all summer long. I only know of a few forbs that actually stay green in the winter that go through a dormant period in the summer. But I know of several forbs that stay green to some extent 365 days of the year. Some examples of these that I'm going to show you today are things like tick-seed coreopsis and white beard tongue, black-eyed Susan, plains coreopsis, grandiflora coreopsis, gray-headed coneflower, long-headed coneflower are all good examples of forbs that do as much growing in the winter time as they may do in the summertime. So to look at some of those and how they perform through the year, tick-seed coreopsis, for instance, actually grows all year long, but it's mostly palatable to livestock in the winter. Cattle will browse on it and graze on it some in the summertime, but once we get to fall and we get a frost, it becomes highly palatable to both cattle and even deer, to a point that they start getting attracted to our production fields of it. So that's one example. Another is gray-headed coneflower. In the summertime, it'll get chest high, bloom pretty, and then as soon as it gets done blooming, the top growth dies, and we go back to a basal rosette that stays green all winter. And that basal rosette can be ankle high to halfway to your knee with lots of big leaves. White beard tongue, it seed heads in late August, blooms, seeds out, and then that seed stalk dies and it goes back to a basal rosette of lush green leaves. So these are different plants that kind of help fill this winter gap of forages by being mixed into your planting. Not only do they graze some in the summer, but they're definitely grazed in the winter. And the philosophy we have is they can eat quite a bit of brown grass that's dormant and brown forbs that are dormant in the winter time if they have a little bit of green to go along with it. It's almost adequate by itself, so a little bit of green goes a long ways. So if we want to come in here and look at some of these plants. So this here is tick-seed coreopsis. This is mid-October. We've had our first frost. This is very, very palatable to deer right now. They're really coming into our fields of it. But anyways, we've got the fall rains cooling down. It's really growed back in the summertime. After it blooms in July, it kind of stays with some growth on it, but it kind of slows its growing down and then takes off again in the fall. This one's been protected. Some of the others here in this field that deer have actually already been working on, but they haven't found this one in amongst the grass. This is what it looks like. You got growth that's probably 4 to 5 inches tall. These are really thick, fleshy leaves. They're not just paper thin, so there's actually quite a bit of forage to a mouthful of that. One I forgot to mention, as I knelt down here, I noticed this aster. It's one of the white blooming asters, and it's been bed off here, and one beside it's been bed off. Those will stay green for quite a while here and then kind of go to a rosette that's already starting to green up down here at the ground. And they'll be like that. There's not a lot on them for like cattle to eat over winter because the growth stays pretty low. But again, just a little bit that they can pick off goes a long ways. And a lot of the forbs, I think, have a pretty high density of vitamins and minerals in them and are actually eaten for that medication or response. Another one over here. This here is white beard tongue. And you can see a seed stalk here that's been bit off, that's been broke over. And here's one here that's actually got the seed pods on it. But either way, it's dying back but to this basal rosette. This basal rosette's gonna stay green and grow through the winter. It'll actually kind of sit here probably through November and December, and then about January, February, it'll really start to grow from where it is into bigger. And it has some medicinal values to it, so we think livestock may use it some in that way to medicate. But that's a good example of another forb that stays green. Over here we have, this here is gray-headed coneflower, and it's kind of gone back to a basal rosette. It's coming out of a spot about that big on the ground. I'll show you in a bit. But what I want you to see is how much the leaves fountain out from that. I mean, we're looking at leaves that are, you know, 14 inches long. Now they're kind of on a stem, and then the leaf itself might be 4 or 5 with multiple leaves on it. But if you look, a lot of these stems are bare on the end, and that's where they've already been bitten off once. The last grazing here was about a month ago, so I'd say most of these leaves got removed 1 month ago. They've bounced back. And that's what grayhead does. Even over winter, we could come through and graze this plant and it'll grow new leaves. Now you don't want to graze those stems down too low if you can help it. Otherwise it'll make really short, low growing leaves that they're kind of to get down below that grazing pressure. But if you can leave it somewhat tall, it'll put new leaves out on that stem. So this is another one, this one's really liked by livestock. And you could, I'll show you here where it comes up out of the ground. That's how big its footprint actually is at the ground. So it's maybe 3 inches wide, 3-inch wide circle. So that's kind of its footprint, and there's brand new little leaves already coming out. So even if we was to come through and graze this whole top off, it's already starting its next growth. It's a very important one, I believe, to a cool season wintering program for livestock. It's highly palatable, and it's very growthy, and livestock seem to really like it. So this is one of our diverse native plantings here, and we've grazed this several times this year. And we just kind of polywire strips and move across it. So it's been grazed, I'd say, moderately heavy the first graze, which didn't happen till about June. So it was grazed in the winter before, but the first graze on this calendar year would have been about June. And then probably about July, August, we come in here and we hit it again with a fairly heavy graze. And now it's October and it's got enough regrowth to graze, but we're just kind of waiting. We're on some other fields that we can cycle through any time. And we'll probably graze this at least 2 more times over winter before April, kind of when we start our spring season. So we're going to get quite a bit more grazing out of this. Invite you to come along and see how that goes for us. So we're back here on December 5th showing you the full establishment of diversity, where we have warm season grass, cool season grass, and forbs and legumes all planted together. There's even some sedges in here. We're still really dry. We're in D1 drought, so we've got about 1/8 of an inch of rain in the last month and a half. So the growth is not quite what we expect it to be, but it's still not doing too bad. So as we look at this, you can see the warm season grass here, the oranges and the browns and the tans. That is what we grazed this summer. And then we have then pulled the livestock out. We haven't been back. We're letting the cool season grass grow, and then we'll start to graze that. I've actually got a little experiment to show you guys. So where I'm standing now, we actually grazed this about 2 weeks ago, and kind of a moderate graze. It wasn't really heavy, but I put the cattle in here for 2 days at about 50 head, and I only fenced off about 1 acre for this experiment to show you guys kind of what we're doing in this video. But as you can see, a lot of the brown now has been either consumed or knocked down as a thatch layer on the ground. The green here is actually starting to respond and grow back through it, even after just 2 weeks of rest. And you can kind of see the manure and stuff in the background around behind me where we grazed, where they concentrated. So that's kind of what it looks like right now. And this here, there is still some brown poking up that we can eat if we come back and graze this again. Now we wouldn't be back to graze this again for 60 days or so. So we need to let it rest. This side over here where I'm standing here now, obviously this is the ungrazed portion where you see a lot taller cool season grass and growth down in here. You know, we've got, this is actually up around 10 or 12 inches. That's a wedge grass. We got the rye in here, a little more clumpy. You know, it's just a different variety of stuff because that's what full season diversity is about. This is more than adequate for our cattle, even with calves on them here in the early part of December. You know, there's a lot of quality, really nutrient dense, cool season grass down in this warm season. The warm season's still just kind of acting as a filler and also a thermal cover that is keeping the ground from freezing here. We haven't hit really, really cold. We've had a few nights that are really cold down in the teens, but our ground hasn't really froze yet at all, particularly where you've got a layer like this on. So it is frosting almost every night, but anyways, that's not really harming anything. It's just part of winter time. So this is part of the grazed part that we set up the experiment on the full diversity. And you can see there's quite a bit of little short green that the cows couldn't get. A lot of that's tick seed coreopsis, gray head, and a lot of really fine grass in here, which is your wedge grass, it's your festuca, it's your rye that's been bitten off. It's regrowing back here after 2 weeks. A lot of it actually has inch and a half regrowth on it. And you can tell that there is a mat of thatch on the ground now that not only have they grazed and consumed a lot of the warm season grass, but you've got this mashed down onto the ground, and it's a thick insulated cover. Underneath that there's all sorts of greenery and plants growing. You can see the thatch, the brown on the ground that they didn't eat, that they knocked down. You can see the cool season greenery in there. And as I pull that back, you can really see that that's insulating the ground. Even though we're dry, we're getting enough frost that's melting. We got a 1/8 inch of rain there last week. The ground's actually pretty damp on top. Now I hear from the people doing heavy equipment work that it's just dry 6 feet down. You know, the top layer's dry or damp from a little bit of rain we've been getting. But that's an insulated cover that keeps these plants green and growing and doing fine. It is mid-January. About, well, probably 3 weeks ago, I ran bison through here and I got 80 animal unit days. So 80 standard animal unit days per acre off of this field. I put 102 head in. It's a 6-acre field. And so that's kind of how we grazed it. I didn't polywire it, I didn't rotationally graze it, I just put them in on the whole 6 acres. So we got quite a bit of animal unit days per acre off of it here at 80, and you can kind of tell as you look at the vegetation behind me. We've been making these videos in the same spot each time. And you can tell that, you know, they've taken a lot of the brown down. The green has gotten shorter. It's a little bit, wish it hadn't snowed a little bit here, makes it a little harder to see the plants, but you can kind of see how it's changed after the graze from the video last month. But what I want to show you too up close is the regrowth of green we're already getting. Keep in mind, we grazed this 3 weeks ago, so that's a rye plant that's regrowing back. Here's a rye plant they didn't even eat because he was in that clump of grass, and so he got protected from them eating it. But you can see that rye there growing up out of it. This rye probably got grazed off, and this one around the edge, I can see where he was bit off. So they're regrowing back. Where things are really trampled and stomped up, you've got green growing there, some festuca, maybe even some cheatgrass, festuca, wedge grass, those will all fill that niche. So that's kind of the Forbs that were in here. Between the deer, they've been eating on them pretty heavy. Probably be 10 or 15 deer out here on this 6 acres every night. So they've been working on the Forbs like tick seed and gray head. So they're pretty denuded. And that's just kind of part of it. It's not good or bad, just the way it goes. We seem to have a lot of deer. So this is kind of what it looks like when you graze. That'll probably be the conclusion of this video series on this one. We've grazed it. As far as the future, what I would do, We grazed this 3 weeks ago. We're in mid-January, so there's probably no point in grazing this again till about April, May, and we may not even come back till June. But April, May, there'll be some regrowth happening here, and you could come back if you needed to. We'll probably wait till June on this particular field. That's just kind of how we go about grazing and looking at DNG through the summertime. The deer will keep coming out here and they'll keep nipping off the green and whatnot. The amount of tonnage that's here is down. Now, as in we've removed a lot of the quality and the tonnage, the deer will just kind of nip and pick at the regrowth. If I was short on grass, I would not be opposed to coming back through here. The green that's here is not that much quantity, and there's not that much regrowth that I'm gonna hurt those plants. There's still plenty of brown grass sticking up, and I like that. That's thermal cover. That's the cover that keeps this soil from freezing as early, and it keeps those plants growing down there in it that are still green. So I like to leave it, but I'm not opposed to running animals back across it and taking some of that. Now, the nutritional plane of this field would not be as good on that next graze as what it was on the graze before it, but it's something to eat. So it might take some hay supplementation, especially if you got cows with calves that aren't weaned, something like that. This has been Colt Hamilton with Hamilton Native Outpost. I really enjoyed making this series of videos for you. I hope you guys enjoy watching it. And if you do, check us out on Facebook and YouTube and our website. We got a lot more there.